the sleepy town of Ravensbrook, where silence fell like a heavy fog each night, Nora was known as the quiet observer. She was a writer by trade, but recently her words had dried up. It was as if the stories she once spun with ease had been locked away, replaced by sleepless nights and eerie silence in her Victorian-style home. Nora's house, sitting at the edge of the town, was once a vibrant hub of inspiration. Now, it had become a prison of her thoughts, where each creak of the floorboards or whisper of the wind sent shivers down her spine. Her latest project was a crime novel, and she had been stuck on a single, devastating scene: the murder. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't write it convincingly, couldn't capture the terror or the brutality. One stormy night, as the rain lashed against her windows and thunder rumbled in the distance, Nora sat at her desk, staring blankly at her laptop. Her fingers hovered over the keys, but no words came. Frustrated, she stood up and paced the room, the echo of her footsteps haunting her. That's when she noticed something strange. The old grandfather clock, which had been broken for years, began to tick, slowly, rhythmically, tick-tock, tick-tock. She froze, the hairs on the back of her neck standing on end. And then there was a knock at the door. It was past midnight. No one ever came to her house this late. Cautiously, she approached the door and peered through the peephole. A man stood there, drenched from the rain, his face obscured by the shadows. His clothes looked tattered, and he seemed almost out of place, like he had stepped out of another time. Nora hesitated, but eventually opened the door just a crack. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice barely more than a whisper. The man smiled, a chilling smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I need a place to stay for the night. The storm is too much." Nora's instincts screamed at her to shut the door, but something about the man kept her rooted in place. Against her better judgment, she let him in. He introduced himself as Ethan, a traveler passing through. He claimed his car had broken down, and he needed shelter until morning. Nora, uneasy but unable to refuse, offered him the guest room. The house seemed to breathe around them, the walls whispering secrets Nora couldn't quite hear. As the night went on, Nora couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Ethan's presence unnerved her. He moved too quietly, spoke too little, and when she asked him about his journey, his answers were vague, filled with gaps that made no sense. Unable to sleep, Nora wandered the house, her mind racing with possibilities. Was he dangerous? Was he hiding something? And then she remembered her unfinished novel, the murder scene. Maybe, just maybe, this encounter was the inspiration she needed. But as the clock struck 3 a.m., something snapped. Nora heard footsteps coming from the guest room. They were slow, deliberate. She grabbed a fireplace poker, her heart pounding in her chest. Creeping toward the noise, she saw Ethan standing in the hallway, staring at her with an intensity that made her blood run cold. "I know what you're thinking," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You're wondering who I really am." Nora gripped the poker tightly. "Who are you?" Ethan took a step closer. "I'm the one who's been in your head, Nora. You didn't invite me in tonight. I've been here for a long time, watching, waiting." Fear washed over her. "What do you want?" His smile widened, cruel and twisted. "I want you to finish the story, the murder scene, remember? You've been struggling with it, but I know how it ends." Nora's mind raced. This couldn't be real. It had to be a dream, or worse, some twisted hallucination brought on by her isolation. But as Ethan moved toward her, she knew this was no fantasy. He lunged at her, and instinct took over. Nora swung the poker with all her strength, connecting with his head. Ethan crumpled to the floor, blood pooling around him. She stood there, breathless, staring at the lifeless body. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. It was just a story. But as the blood spread across the floor, Nora realized something horrifying. Ethan had been right all along. He was her story. He was the murder. In a daze, Nora stumbled back to her desk, her hands shaking. She opened her laptop and began to type, the words pouring out of her like a dam had been broken. The murder scene finally came to life, vivid and brutal. But as she wrote the final line, she realized the truth. Ethan was never a stranger. He had been with her all along, lurking in the darkest corners of her mind. The midnight guest was no one